Hello. This video is about free will. There's an interesting experience that I have. Occasionally, people will tell me, go read this, go do this, go read this thing, go read this thing. Because I didn't agree with something they said, and they're like, go read this. As if, as soon as I read this thing, I'm now going to agree. And I don't. What actually ends up happening is I read the thing and I still don't agree, and because the problem was obvious. It was there in the writing, just like it was there in the thing that you said. So there is something to be said for people who are uninformed, and it's like, well, you don't know anything about astronomy, you should go learn some astronomy to understand what's happening. But then there is something else entirely to be said for when a person is exposed to all the information, or all the right information, but for whatever reason they are misjudging or mischaracterizing, or something about the way that they're framing all the information is wrong. There's an assumption in there that's invalid. There's an assumption in there that's wrong. And that assumption doesn't change regardless of what I read. And I'm saying this because my thing is that I actually don't read a lot compared to what a lot of students of academia do. Well, it's not that I don't read a lot. I just don't feel the need to go read all of these works by all these authors to have a good sense of what's right and wrong in those cases. And it depends very much on whether you've been exposed to the right information at all. Because, see, having an opinion on something that, where there is like a prerequisite of having read and familiarize yourself with certain concepts to understand, say math or physics or a science, versus something where you already meet the requirements for understanding the concepts. It's just a matter of, looking at the argument, right? And that's the situation I usually find myself in. Now, the reason I bring all this up, what this has to do with free will, is, it's just one of these things where I find that I'm just like surrounded by complete and utter sophistry for just inexplicable to me reasons. I was watching this lecture by Noam Chomsky, and I like Noam Chomsky. I agree with him on pretty much, well, on very many things. I think he's he's brilliant. There's no reason to. I don't need to go out of my way to compliment Noam Chomsky. And he was talking about the limits of our understanding, the limits of our consciousness, and the limits of this and that, and so on and so forth, and the difference, the reason, the mind-body problem, and how there isn't really a mind-body problem, because everything that is a body is understood through the mind. And it was some argument. It's linked in the description. You can go watch the whole thing in its entirety. I agree with all that. It goes together very well with my whole thing about inherent subjectivity and inherent objectivity, and how everything we understand is inherent subjectivity, which has nothing to do with use, subjective or objective. But anyway, then at the end of the whole thing, it's not even related to the main topic, but there's this segment about Q&A, and people were asking Noam Chomsky about free will, and they were saying, what about, free will, and if we understand consciousness as just an emergent property of brains, and something that's very, something that's very sort of scientific, and something that's very biological and scientific in nature, and there's no like cosmic force or whatever, or if there is, we don't know anything about it. So the point is, it's understood through a physicalist lens. It's understood through a scientific lens. And someone was making comments like, well, what does that say about free will? Doesn't that mean there is no free will? And Chomsky was saying, and this is the first time I encountered his view about free will, but he was basically saying how we have to assume free will is a thing. We have to assume free will is a thing, and even though there's all these authors out there who are saying free will isn't a thing, they haven't actually touched on free will. It's paraphrasing what he said, but that's effectively what he said. He said free will is it's something we have to assume. And the woman who was asking the question was also asking if we need to assume free will to be a thing for there to be ethics, for there to be morality. And Chomsky wasn't even addressing that. He was just saying that in general we have to assume that there is free will. It's like a necessary assumption of any theory or framework that we construct. And it's just, free will does seem to be a more popular thing amongst philosophers than physicists as well, from what I can tell. There's like compatibilists and stuff amongst philosophers. That's like a much bigger thing. You ask the average physicist, they'll probably tell you that there is no free will, that it's all just, there's no, or they'd ask you, what does that mean? They'd ask you a question, they'd probably say something like that. And this reminds me of another conversation I had a few weeks ago with this just unbelievable idiot who was proudly just asserting, you need free will to have morality. You need free will. Prove to me that that's not the case. And you know what? I have this thing. It's somewhat a flaw, but whenever I'm in an argument with a person, I tend to, well, there's two parts of me. Like, on the one hand, if they're saying something that seems crazy to me, I can't agree with it, right? I just can't be like, that's okay. However, if a person is very assertive and very confident and declaring what it is they think is true, part of me believes them, So with this guy, it's like complaining about free will, and Noam Chomsky as well. It's like, my mind tells me they're wrong, but my paranoia tells me that they're right, because my paranoia tells me that I'm wrong, that I've, again, I haven't read anything. Maybe I'm just an idiot over here. I don't know. Maybe this is me trying to be more agreeable or whatever, but I always have this paranoia that everything that I know just isn't true. And I haven't been able to latch on to anything real. It's sort of a sick existential fear. But enough about that. The point is that does motivate a lot of my behavior in these arguments. Like, I can't agree with them because it doesn't make sense to me, but I get so terrified. It's like, what if I'm wrong? Because these people are so certain in what they're saying. They're so certain. They're so sure of themselves to the point where, like, how are they so sure of themselves? How could they be so sure of themselves? What are they, how do they know? Like, why aren't they reacting the same way I am? How do they know that I'm not right? What assumptions have I made that are wrong, right? If I'm wrong, right? It's that whole thing, and it constantly, like, I hate the feeling, but it constantly comes into my mind. It's only after the argument that I think about it, and I'm like, oh, okay, this person, and I really take a break and think about what they said, and maybe it can deconstruct it, and then the paranoia sort of goes away, and I stop worrying because I realize, well, they just didn't make any sense, and I see the big picture point. But in the argument, I'm just blinded by this paranoia. It sort of makes it very hard to communicate because I'm afraid. Well, I'm afraid that every move I make is wrong. In other words, it's like I'm getting convinced in a way. It's like I'm getting convinced in a very superficial sense. They're not convincing my mind, but they're convincing my fear of being wrong, basically. I'm an extrovert, I think, and when people are going to be asserting things very confidently, even if the claim is complete BS, but the more confidently you assert it, the more likely I am to think, well, what if that's true? It's very hard to, I don't know, it's very hard for me not to think that way. What that has to do with this is this guy was saying the exact same shit that Noam Chomsky was saying. I know I've gone off on a tangent, but the point is this whole thing about free will and free will fundamentalism. Because, honestly, people, my point is I have no clue why anyone needs this concept to be true. Like, why Chomsky is saying that, like, oh, this needs to be true. We need to assume this. I don't assume it. Where do I assume free will? That's like my immediate, like, reactions. Like, where in my ideas do I assume free will? I don't think you need free will. You don't need a free will for science. You don't need free will for aesthetics or value. You don't even need free will for morality. You don't. People, I've heard the argument that's like, well, you need free will for morality because you need to imagine different choices, different options for a person to take before they understand what's right and wrong. No, absolutely not. If you mean that there needs to be free will in the sense that people make choices and that people need to imagine hypothetical options, sure, that's true, but that doesn't mean that free will actually exists. That doesn't mean that you need to assume the concept of free will as a basis for your ethical theory. All you need to assume is that there is such a thing as value, that there is a value system, and that the value system places the value system is an ordering of different consequences, basically. Different consequences and different options, and there's the best consequences and the worst ones. That is what you need. You need a value system that tells you that there are good consequences, there's bad consequences, and medium consequences. It's a whole spectrum, right? And then the choice is simply the fact that we don't know which of these consequences is probable, in the way we make decisions, right? We don't know which consequence is going to happen necessarily because we don't know what decisions are going to be made in the future. We don't know what things are going to happen. However, we can predict certain things based on certain assumptions. Like, if this choice is made, this consequence will happen. If this choice is made, this consequence will happen. We can causally relate certain choices with certain consequences. And at that point, once we have related choices with consequences, it's just a matter of assigning the best consequences with that which is morally optimal, and saying that that's the morally optimal. Nothing in that process assumes that there has to be a free will, right? Like, nothing about that says there's free will, right? All it suggests is that there is a decision-making process that involves looking at different hypothetical choices. Now, if you assume determinism, people turn around and be like, oh, okay, but if everything's deterministic, there are no choices. There are no choices. Well, it's like, there are no choices in the sense that the universe will play out in only one possible way, but we can't know what that is, right? We don't know, we can't see that far ahead. All we can see ahead of time, if we look ahead, is how certain choices will causally relate to certain consequences. We don't know which of those ways, like, it's like, determinism is not the same. Believing in that everything is happening deterministically is not the same thing as assuming that that we're omniscient somehow. Like, the decision-making process under uncertainty is what morality is, and all it requires is a value system. It doesn't require any kind of free will. It just requires for us to be able to relate certain choices and certain values, right? Because that's part of how we make decisions, right? Part of how we make decisions is considering future options and considering what's going to happen and then making a choice based on that. Nothing in that process assumes free will. All that assumes is that a human being who is conscious of the future needs to look at causal relationships between what's happening now and what might happen in the future and relate that to his or her own value system and determine what the optimal choice is based on that value system. So again, it's like it boils down to a value system. I don't see where is the free will assumption? Like, where in that whole scheme is free will? Like, free will in a sense that it conflicts with determinism. In a sense that there's like space that free will takes that determinism doesn't. Honestly, I don't even have that much of a problem with the concept of free will, except for that I don't think that it's used well. Like, it's used to justify retributionist forms of ethics and libertarian ethics, and in the case of this fucking idiot guy that I was talking to, in his case, it's used to justify completely nonsense ethics and to not look at the value system at all. Because this guy was saying that value isn't a choice and morality is. Therefore, the question of value is not an ethical question. Which to me is like the biggest, just blaring red light of crazy, because like, no, that's absolutely not true. Values are not static. Values can change. Our values change as a result of our choices, and so on and so forth. Value is entirely a question of morality. In fact, all of morality as a whole is in general a question of what is valuable and what is not. And then this guy was, this is my problem with him, was his belief in free will was basically used to artificially separate the concepts of morality from value, which was the source of the whole disagreement. And it really irritated me, because I can't, those two things are non-separable. It doesn't even matter if you assume free will. Even if you assume free will, I still don't see how value and morality are separable. But that's a separate question. The point is, this free will fundamentalism doesn't seem to have any use other than to it's just as a rule, if you're going to assume things that aren't true, you're probably going to come out with bad systems of ethics, bad systems of thought, bad ideas, bad everything, if you assume things that aren't true. That is what free will is. It's an assumption of a thing that isn't, it's not a thing. Free will is not a thing. So we can't assume that it exists, because it isn't a thing. So that the problem there, if you assume it's a thing, as you should according to Chomsky, then there is no, if you assume that it is a thing, then even then I still don't see how it affects anything, because any question, ethically or descriptively or scientifically, all assumes some sort of determinism, some kind of causality being present, right? Even if you're making an ethical question, you're making an ethical claim based on, in order to make an ethical claim, you need to have a system of value, you need to have a sense of causality, in a sense of if you do this, this will happen. If you do X, Y will happen. You need to have a sense of causality. You don't need to have, I don't see how free will fits into anything. It's like, it is entirely like God, and like just like every theory that started out with bad assumptions, it should eventually, the bad assumptions should be recognized and the theory jettisoned in favor of a better theory. Or the theory should be reduced, down to those systems where it applies. But I don't see where free will applies. I don't think it applies to morality. I don't think it applies anywhere. That's my view. The thing is, it scares me to see people like Chomsky so like certain that this is like some fundamental underneath it all there is this concept of free will, like an axiom. I just don't. To me, it seems like people are obsessed with free will because they're afraid that they're going to lose something with free will. They're going to lose something with freedom. You're going to lose your libertarian whatever, whether you're right or left libertarian. You're going to lose something like that. You're going to lose your sense of whatever. That's one way I could explain why free will fundamentalism is a thing. That I don't really have any other explanation. I can't think of any other reason why people think that this concept is so present. And it does, I admit, it does seem to be intuitive, at least superficially, in the sense that you have hypothetical different options, but those hypothetical options have nothing to do with free will. They just have to do with the value system that you use to order different scenarios and universes, from states of worst to best, and then that value system determines your choice. The free will thing has again, it has nothing to do with it, and I can only explain the emergence of the concept of free will as a social phenomena of people genuinely being afraid that certain structures are lost if we omit free will. That's the sense that I'm getting. I think it's totally removable. I think it's like God, like any type of religion, like the free market, all these models that are just, all these models that are founded upon crazy assumptions can be jettisoned. And again, kind of like the last video, I'm actually asking a question here. Funny thing is, nobody answered that question. But I'm actually asking people a question here. If you have opinions on this, if you have an opinion on this, please share it. Because the way this works is I'm not sure if I'm just crazy or if everybody else is. Is this actually a social phenomenon where we're still struggling with free will fundamentalism? It's not something we've omitted from our thinking completely. You know, like a bad assumption of a bad theory that lead to more mistakes in other places if you assume it's there. No, you know, if it's an assumption that has to be there, why can't I see that? Why can't I see this assumption as something, as a fundamental axiom that we need to assume? Like, what concept does free will refer to? Right, the words free will, what is that? What entity does that represent in reality, in our understanding of reality? What is that thing? It's not a thing. It's, you keep coming back to. It's like the goddamn free market. It is not a thing. Sorry, the free market is the anarcho-capitalist free market is not a thing. It's like that. It's like nihilism. Nihilism is not a thing. And this is so frustrating to me, because this was the very thing that Chomsky was talking about. He was talking about how in this talk, he was talking about that philosophically, you could ask yourself questions, and you can have questions, but the questions are gibberish and nonsense, because they're phrased like questions, they're semantically structured like questions, but they don't actually make any sense. And this was how he explained the reason there's no mind-body problem. He said, it's like, you know, is everything physical? It's like, that's not really a question. That's not really a question. It has the form of a question, grammatically, but the question doesn't actually make any sense, because before you even, like, the question is everything physical or is everything ideas, you know, dualism. That's not a real question, because before you could even begin to answer that question, you have to explain what physical is. You have to explain what idealism are. You have to explain what these things are. But what is physical? Well, physical is just whatever we understand. The physical is just what we think about the way the real world works. It's a collection of our theories, and, you know, our theories and sort of the greater cosmology of the way the world works, and the assumptions of those theories and the evidence we've collected, and, you know, everything about the outside world that we, you know, think and assume is true based on those theories. That is what physical means. But that just means physical is whatever we understand, which means it is the same thing as idealism or the set of ideas, you know. So there is no difference between physical and idea. Like, the one is, they're referring to the same thing. In other words, the question isn't really a question. That's what he was saying in the whole talk. It's a good talk in general. I agree with that whole concept. I agree that it is possible to, like, language offers us a way to construct sentences and questions and even theories that are complete utter gibberish internally and externally. They don't make any sense, but yet they qualify as sort of semantically legitimate. They make perfect sense linguistically, right? They have all the structure that they need to within the language to make sense. They don't actually make sense conceptually. And nihilism is another one of those things. There's no such thing as a nihilist. Like, I've said this how many times, I don't know, but there is no such thing as a nihilist. There's no such thing as a real libertarian. There's no such thing as an anarcho-capitalist. There's no such thing as anarcho-capitalism, so on and so forth. These things don't exist because they don't represent real things, or they don't represent things that could and make sense within human concept. And my idea is that free will is just another one such thing. But according to Chomsky, it apparently isn't. So I'm just confused about that. Am I crazy? Because I swear to God, if the solution is to this is that I'm just crazy, that I just don't, then I must be miswired. Like, my brain must be screwed on backwards if I can't see the necessity of free will as a concept, because I don't see myself ever accepting it. It's like Sam Harris when he said, someone asked him on his podcast once, it's like, what would it take for you to believe in free will? And he's like, free will is like the thing I'm never going to be convinced about. And I actually agree with him on that. It's like, I don't see myself ever being convinced of free will as a legitimate concept that we need to assume in any way. I don't see where in my own thinking I assume it. I don't see where in my thinking anyone assumes it. I don't believe it's a thing. You know? I don't know if I can believe it's a thing. Where is it? Like, where am I assuming it? I swear, it's like sometimes I feel like, you know, different people and we're just like from different planets, or you know, we're from the same planet, but like to them the entire planet is orange or something. It just doesn't make any fucking sense. What they see and what they think. It's crazy. Where is free will? I even have fucking Mike Hugman telling me that you need to assume free will. Even he thinks this. It's like, I swear, I never encountered this problem when I was in school. I talked to my physicist friends. None of this. We are completely in agreement. I talked to my other friend Mike. He's like totally in agreement. Everything makes sense. No, yes, there's no free will. The universe is either random or deterministic. And no, you don't need free will for morality. That's not even a thing. But then I venture out here into the real world, and all of a sudden everyone's saying that you need free will to have morality. What the fuck? It's crazy to me. So honestly, what is the damn solution here? Because it doesn't. I just want to understand. I want to understand what the truth is. You know, I want to know what the truth is. What is the truth? What is the truth? Am I just crazy? Am I somehow blind? Am I not seeing where I'm assuming the concept of free will? Am I not aware of where it shows up in my own reasoning and where it shows up in everyone's reasoning? Hence, it's a concept we must assume is there, and it's an axiom. It needs to be there. Or is there free will fundamentalism? Are people assuming that free will needs to be a thing because they don't understand how morality could work without free will? Kind of like this, the idiot I was talking to a few weeks ago. Is there no, is there no, am I understanding morality and value wrong? Is this just people don't know, like, how morality could work without free will? Like, all you need is a value system, and that's that. That's not something people are aware of. That's just me. I'm the only one who's realized that. What's the damn solution? Like, holy shit. As far as I can tell, I don't see from what anyone said, I don't see anything to convince me that free will is a thing. Or has to be a thing. And just, part of theoretical paranoia, if you will, if it's not a thing, don't assume it's there. Don't assume it's there. We don't have to assume that it's there if it's not a thing. See, we don't have to assume nihilism. We don't, anything else. We don't have to assume free will. We do have to assume some things, in science. We do have to assume certain things. We do have to make some assumptions in order to understand the world. And there's debate about what those assumptions are. Free will is not one of them. Free will is not one of the things that we have to assume is there. And if we don't have to assume that it's there, then it's not there. That we don't assume it. That's because if we do, we're just going to end up in the wrong place, ideologically. That's how I see it. Anyway, I want to know what people think. Am I the crazy one? Or is it me and Sam Harris, the two crazy people here on Earth, that we don't think that free will is A, not a thing, B, in no way entangled with any kind of moral concepts whatsoever? Or is Noam Chomsky right? Sorry, or I did the thing again. Or is Noam Chomsky wrong? Anyway, that's that. Farewell and cheers.